Being a 90s kid, I'm a little too young to have experienced Mario's original NES games at the time. The pixelated masterpieces of Super Mario Bros. 1, 2 and 3 were defining genres and shaping industries before my hands were big enough to hold a controller. It didn't matter though. Mario's early catalogue has remained easy to get a hold of, such as its enduring influence and lucrativeness, with his parent company Nintendo having served up numerous ways to play so that subsequent generations can get in on the fun. The first of such collections is the one for which I'm most thankful, the 1993 masterstroke of Super Mario All-Stars on the SNES. This bumper package took the revolutionary gameplay of the originals and updated them with enhanced 16-bit features, like modern graphics with a wider colour palette, more detailed artwork and characterful sprites, scrolling backgrounds, increased music channels for lusher soundscapes, and the option to save your progress. It allowed a new audience to experience their genius with the increased proficiency of the contemporary console and, for my money, is the definitive way to play them. All-Stars was among the first video games I ever owned, but the fact it was 5 in 1 meant it served as something of a personal history lesson as well. It feels kind of redundant to review the original Marios at this point. He's such an intrinsic part of gaming infrastructure that it kind of feels like explaining the concept of streets. They've been analysed so much that in this video I'd rather wax lyrical about my memories, off-the-cuff knowledge and stray observations of those golden early titles. But first, as weird as it sounds, I can't talk about Super Mario All-Stars without mentioning this VHS tape that came with it. I was about to make a joke there explaining to any young viewers what a VHS is by saying it was like a clunkier version of a DVD, but I recently found out that kids today don't know what DVDs are and I could feel my bones decaying, so I'll just push on. This featured Craig Charles in one of a few sci-fi sets he'd find himself in after Red Dwarf, as he presented segments about the history of Mario, reviews and cheats, and visited the office of the Nintendo Hotline, a now antiquated service that you could ring for hints and tips before the advent of the internet, staffed by these expressionless experts. There's also a section about how games were made at the time, the sort of thing that's easy to learn about now thanks to YouTube and such, but at the time it was a pretty interesting insight into what felt like a mysterious nascent industry. Some of its animations haven't aged particularly well. Who am I kidding? None of its animations have aged particularly well. But finding this show again recently was one of the biggest blasts from the past I've had for a while. Anyway, on to the games. I don't hold any nostalgia for the NES, having never owned one, so I've little patience for the artificial difficulty of the original Mega Man, Zelda, Mother, and other titles of that era that a lot of people seem to possess. Mario doesn't feel like that though. Even the 1985 version feels intuitive and progressively challenging, and making it more aesthetically pleasing cemented it as an ever-appealing prospect for me. While it's been many years since I sat down and played it from start to finish, I'll never get tired of racing through World 1. There's something so satisfying about making your way through these opening stages, like revisiting a childhood haunt with those smiling clouds in the background welcoming you like an old friend. That's what made it so sad to see an abandoned, lifeless version of it in the Smash Bros. Series years later. There's the environmental tutorial at the start for a first-time player, where you'll die if you don't figure out how to jump over the Goomba. You'll then experiment further by jumping to hit the blocks above you for coins. One will produce a mushroom that moves on its own, so you'll need to act fast to decide whether to touch it or not. Doing so will make Mario grow larger and able to destroy the brick blocks you couldn't before. This tiny microcosm of the game basically teaches you the entire premise in a matter of moments. It's genius in a way. I used to think this rustling grass at the bottom of this pit was dangerous, the piranha plants having conditioned me to fear moving vegetation, but it turns out it's totally safe. It is a larger part of an ongoing tutorial though, giving you a failsafe if you don't make this admittedly easy jump before testing you again over a bottomless pit. The underground stage of 1-2 changes things up a little. The fact it consists of many more blocks initially makes things feel more constricted and intimidating, but learning you can break through them if you've eaten a mushroom or fire flower means you can effectively experiment with tunneling your way through parts of it. I didn't actually notice until recently that Mario continues travelling upwards after breaking a block, which does make him feel a bit floatier than in the original, but it's obviously not something that hampered my enjoyment if I've only just learned about it. I love this little part here where as a reward for being powered up Mario you can go over the top and grab the coins, but otherwise you'll need to go under and either take on or avoid the approaching enemies. You can even cheese the level by getting to the top and running along the row of bricks, which otherwise looks like a ceiling. And going over the usual exit takes you to warp pipes that allow you to skip ahead several worlds. In the original, you could perform a glitch here to take you to the infinitely looping Minus world, but it was patched out in the remake. Always thought the snowy nighttime levels were pretty here too. All in all, still a great game, even if it's quite bare bones in comparison to what was to come. Here, before we move on, let's see if I can recreate 1-1 from memory in Mario Maker. This is probably the most significant component of this collection, as it was the first time it had been released outside of Japan, where it had been called Super Mario Bros. 2. It used the same engine and assets as the original, but was fiendishly difficult, so much so that those in power at Nintendo of America didn't think Western kids would be able to handle it. This feels a bit patronising, but perhaps it just stems from a time when video games were still seen as childish toys that had to be marketed as such, rather than a valid all-ages pastime. The Lost Levels introduces some neat mechanics that would resurface later in the series, like using wind to affect your movement, greater use of floating platforms, and secret exits. These trampolines can burn in hell though. A lot of it though almost feels counterintuitive and undoes much of what the first Mario Brothers taught you. One of the first mushrooms you'll encounter is now a poisonous purple one, which actually harms Mario rather than empowering him. Several of the warp zones actually send you back to earlier levels. Punishing you for your hubris and attempts to use shortcuts, this is Super Mario Bros. With the gloves off. They did offer this awesome, relatively easy cheat at the beginning though, where you can nab yourself 128 lives. I always get a kick out of doing this, before realising I don't really want to use them to play through the rest of this tedious game. I don't have much else to say about it. It's Mario but hard, it's not very fun, and my least favourite part of this collection. But I guess it's an interesting example of the cultural difference or disconnect between East and West when it comes to gaming sensibilities. This was actually the first one I played in All Stars. I'm not sure why I didn't start chronologically, maybe because I was already familiar with the original, having had a go of the NES version at other people's places. My first foray into the land of Subcon is a weirdly vivid memory for me. Back in those days when getting to play on a console was dependent upon technologically challenged parents being able to hook it up to a TV. My dad somehow managed, and the rest is history. This one doesn't quite feel like a Mario game, because it isn't. Not originally anyway. The black sheep of the family, it was actually a reskinned version of Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic, a title created by Nintendo for Fuji TV's 1987 media event. Since there was no international release of the Lost Levels, they decided to replace Yume Kojo's characters with Mario & Co. and sell it to the West as a sequel to Super Mario Bros. Interestingly, this was the first appearance of several enemies who would become Mario staples, but who weren't designed for that reason in the first place. It's hard to imagine the series without Bob-ombs, Shy Guys, Pokies or Birdo, so I'm glad they adopted them for future use. As well as characters, Mario 2 kind of inadvertently introduced mechanics to the series, such as vertical platforming and the ability to hold and throw items and enemies, a concept dreamt up by developer Kensuke Tanabe that had been resting on the shelf until they needed ideas for Doki Doki Panic. The very first level drops you from the sky and you need to make a leap of faith into the unknown to progress. This instantly breaks the convention of Mario's left to right framework, as well as recalling the Mario Bros. Arcade game with the ability to walk off one edge of the screen and reappear at the other. Mario 2 retains Doki Doki Panic's Arabian theme by reframing its world as apparently taking place in Mario's dream. There's no Bowser or his minions to be seen though, therefore Princess Toadstool, as she was known back then, hasn't been captured and is instead playable. She's actually my character of choice, as her floating ability means you can practically skip loads of hazards. Mario and Toad are alright, but I find Luigi kind of frustrating to play as. This one can get quite difficult at points, and his daft floaty jump doesn't make things any easier. These mask things kind of freak me out. I think I have a phobia of enemies that can move so freely around the screen, which we'll look at in the next entry too. Mario Bros. 2 is an oddity, but one I'm kind of fond of. It's funny how a Mario game that wasn't a Mario game ultimately had such an influence on the series. English actor and comedian Rik Mayall made a number of TV adverts for Nintendo games in the 90s, including Super Mario All-Stars. He reportedly bought a house in London with the money, which he dubbed Nintendo Towers.
I mean, it's just typical. You can never find a plumber when you need one, then four come along at once.
This was perhaps Mario's breakthrough in a sense. If not commercially, then perhaps critically. Yes, the first one had sold gangbusters and the second one had been intriguing, but this was the actual sequel that fans had been yearning for. It was marketed relentlessly in The Wizard, a film about a kid who enters a gaming tournament, and it even made a cameo in Beethoven a few years later, somehow being played multiplayer and using a power glove. From a design perspective, Mario Bros. 3 established the idea of hub worlds, in which you'd enter the stages through an interactive map as opposed to simply being thrown into them in an unchanging linear fashion. There were like 90 of them to conquer this time around, compared to the poxy 32 and 20 of the previous instalments. You could interact with elements of these overworlds, like taking on enemies, finding shortcuts and scoring prizes. The range of these items became much more varied. The Super Leaf and Tanuki suit allowed Mario to fly and turn to stone, the Frog suit allowed him to swim with ease, and the Hammer suit let him throw projectiles like his most annoying foes. Some items were created for use on the map screen, like the music box that would put patrolling enemies to sleep so you could sneak past, or the Warp Whistle, which allowed you to skip ahead several worlds like in the previous games. The best known way to get one of these is to hold down on this white block in 1-3, which will eventually cause Mario to drop behind the scenery in order to access a hidden Toad house. This was actually parodied in the excellent Celeste in 2018, in which there's also a white block that lets you climb the cliffs in the background to reach a heart. In the first fortress level, you can also use a leaf to fly above the ceiling, run to the right and hold up to enter a hidden room with another warp whistle. It makes me feel a bit warm and fuzzy when I effortlessly skip to the end of the game using these tricks that I learned nearly 3 decades ago. It was long thought that Mario Bros. 3 is actually a stage play, given how the curtain rises and falls at the start and end, and the platforms appear to be bolted onto the backdrop or suspended from the rafters, and how the end of each level has Mario enter a dark area as if walking off stage. This was all finally confirmed by Miyamoto around the release of Super Mario Maker. I particularly loved World 4 with the giant enemies and blocks, a concept later reused in Super Mario 64, which I mentioned in my video on that revolutionary game. World 5 was really cool too, how it started on the ground but then this mysterious tower would take you to stages above the clouds. 6-5 stumped me when I was a kid. It was an icy cave that would trap you in a loop unless you realised you had to fly to a secret exit while holding a Koopa shell. This was easier said than done though, as it was difficult to hold onto the Super Leaf power-up while avoiding enemies and clearing yourself a runway for flight. The 8th world was an apocalyptic hellscape lined with skulls and fire, as well as these creepy hands that dragged Mario under the ground, coupled with levels that seemingly took place in a war zone in which the plumber would have to navigate tanks, airships and cannons. The Dark World carried an intimidating air that felt slightly out of place within the usually sunny series. The enemies had become more intimidating too. The angry sun puts me on edge a bit as it lunges at you with a trajectory that kind of clashes with Mario's movement. It's the same reason that the Hammer Brothers are so taxing. Seriously hate those things. Some of the new foes had real life inspirations. Boos were based on the wife of director Takashi Tezuka, who was normally a quiet person but erupted at her husband in a rage when he came home late from work, similar to how the ghosts are shy but sneak up on Mario when his back is turned. Chain Chomps, meanwhile, were based on an aggressive dog that had spooked Miyamoto as a kid, but was held back from biting him by a tether. That's why Chomps bark and are kind of treated like pets or guard dogs in the Mario universe. Thwomps, on the other hand, are just stone blocks with enraged faces that fall from nowhere to crush Mario into pesto. But as much as the Mario series was forming more and more of an identity with this stellar new entry, it was mere baby steps compared to... In 1994, 1 year after its initial launch, Nintendo re-released All-Stars to include the bona fide classic Super Mario World, which had originally been an SNES game itself and was the benchmark by which the NES titles in the collection would be remade. Placing Mario into the mysterious, often spooky wilds of Dinosaur Land, it looked and played like a Saturday morning cartoon, with its appealing visuals, expressive characters and physical gags. Nintendo took the lessons they had learned through the first 3 and refined them into an edition that lived up to the World moniker. Unlike Mario 3, in which each region was a separate map screen, Super Mario World was interconnected, giving you the impression of traversing a vast land and its open plains, foreboding caves, perilous cliffs, forest mazes and haunted mansions. The option of replaying levels allowed for the expansion of the secret exit idea, which this time would often change the actual route Mario took across the map. In fact, from the very start of the game, it's evident that things work a little differently here, given the fact there are essentially 2 first levels. From the starting point, you can venture west to what's technically the first one, completion of which will bring you to the Yellow Switch Palace, which will solidify any yellow block outlines you've seen, letting you obtain items from them or even use them as platforms. You can head east from the beginning and start with Stage 2, but your experience might be different without the optional yellow blocks. This feature, which often worked in tandem with the secret exits, gave this world a kind of malleability that hadn't really been felt in Mario before. Then there was Star Road. I freaked out the first time I stumbled upon this hidden map, and secretly still feel kinda cool and knowledgeable when I effortlessly unlock it during playthroughs to this day. These courses were often deconstructive, based around manipulating Mario's various abilities to reach different goals. And not just Mario's abilities, I haven't even mentioned one of the main selling points of this game yet, Yoshi, or Theropoda Yoshisaur Munchakoopas to give him his Sunday name. This was the first appearance of Mario's dinosaur sidekick, who added a new dimension to the traditional platforming, capable of flight, fire breathing and stomping, as well as being able to act as both a springboard or a damage shield for Mario. Completing all of the Star Road through some plumber and dinosaur teamwork takes you to the special world, which featured levels that ranged from the novel, like getting to play the title screen demo, to frustrating, like a course based around using the new balloon power-up over a bottomless pit while avoiding projectiles. The final stage, simply called Funky, even spelled out "You are a super player" in coins. The Lost Levels was known as Super Mario Bros. 2 for super players in the Japanese version of All-Stars, which, as we've discussed, was rejected by Nintendo of America. It's nice that Western audiences were finally lauded for their efforts instead of not being allowed to play some hard levels in the first place. We ain't no snowflakes. The game outsold its predecessor and became the best-selling game on the SNES, thanks in no small part to being one of its launch titles. The Mario All-Stars package itself became its second best-selling one, an example of just how much stock both Nintendo and Mario fans put into their mascots' outings. All-Stars started a trend of keeping these early installments easily accessible across subsequent consoles, even if that's an ethos they haven't stuck to when it comes to other series. The easiest official way to play them at the moment is via Switch Online, where Mario 1-3 are available in NES form as well as Mario All-Stars for the remakes, and Super Mario World is on there separately. If you've never played these, again, it sort of feels pointless to recommend Mario nowadays, but these titles truly are cornerstones of game design and the medium's historical development. Earlier this year, a friend of mine who was visiting me told me she'd never played Mario before, and it made me feel a little sad for her. I thrust some Joy-Cons into her hands and made her play the opening level of Super Mario Bros. It was kinda painful to watch, but old school Mario is just such a cultural mainstay that anyone with any interest in gaming should at least have a brief dalliance with the portly plumber. I can't tell you how impactful this ample collection was on me. Everything from the repetitive jingle of the game select screen to the power-up noises fill me with nostalgic delight, and memories of Mario smiling at me from the crappy portable CRT television in my room are kinda like the screensaver of my mind. As much as Mario has taken bold strides into the future in recent times with Odyssey and Wonder, I'll always be glad to take a warp pipe down memory lane to where it all began. And if you're in the mood for more Mario, why not go back and check out the videos I did earlier this year on Super Mario 64, Paper Mario, and the nightmarish making of the original Super Mario Bros. Movie.